Every lookout tower in the Cascades keeps the same logbook. Temperature at 0600, visibility in miles, number of smoke columns, bearing, estimated distance. It is a dull book on purpose. The Forest Service likes dull. Dull means nobody up there alone is imagining things. There is a tower above a drainage called Sawtooth Fork, where the log runs a few days ahead of whoever is holding the pencil. Nobody posted there past the first week ever mentions it at the district office. They just start writing very carefully, like the truth of the day depended on their handwriting matching what already sat on the page. This one came to me from a district office closing out its backcountry program, boxing up logbooks nobody wanted to store anymore. Most were routine. Weather sightings, the occasional bear complaint. This one had loose pages, out of order, swollen near the spine like it had been read in the rain more than once. The name inside the front cover was Warren Kessler. Fire season, 1 year, Corbin Ridge Lookout, Taylor's Creek Ranger District. I will read it the way I found it. My name is Warren Kessler. Before this, I spent 11 years climbing poles for a rural electric cooperative out of the Snake River country. And I want to say plainly that a man who has made a living 40 feet up a wooden pole in an ice storm does not scare easy, so that whatever you make of the rest of this, you understand it did not come from a nervous man. I took the Corbin Ridge assignment in June, replacing a lookout I never met, for reasons the district ranger explained to me exactly once, in a tone that told me she did not intend to explain them twice. My wife Carol and I had separated that spring, not loudly, the way most marriages actually end, more like a kitchen faucet you mean to fix for 2 years running until one day you notice you have stopped hearing it drip. I took the job because the ranger station had an opening and I had a summer with nothing scheduled into it. And because the idea of 6 months where nobody needed anything from me but a weather report sounded at the time like the closest thing to rest I was going to get. Dale Ashby had manned the tower 3 seasons running before me. Good marks every year. Steady logs, no complaints, no incidents worth writing up. Then in the second week of June, he called in a routine supply request, spelled everything correctly, said please and thank you the way he always did, and walked off the mountain 2 days later without radioing anybody first. They found him 7 weeks after that, working the grill at a truck stop diner outside Yakima, going by a slightly different version of his own name, Dale instead of Dallas, or the other way around. I never got that detail straight. When the district asked him about Corbin Ridge, he told them there was not anything to tell, and then he asked them politely not to come back and ask him again. Nobody did. They just needed the tower filled before the dry lightning started, and I was the closest thing to available. A packer named Peg Dutrow hauled me, and 2 weeks of food up the switchbacks on a government mule that hated me on sight, and never once warmed to me across the whole season, no matter how many apples I offered it at the trailhead. Peg had packed that route 11 years, she told me, long enough to have an opinion about every lookout who had ever manned Corbin Ridge, and she kept most of those opinions to herself the way a person does when they have decided you are not worth the breath yet. The last 3 miles of that trail switched back up out of the timber so steep the mule had to stop and blow every quarter mile, and Peg used those stops to point out landmarks I would come to know by heart before the summer was out. A lightning snag shaped like a man reaching for something. A tailless slope where she swore she had seen a wolverine once and nobody at district believed her. The exact bend in the trail where you finally clear the last of the subalpine fir, and the whole Sawtooth Fork drainage opens up underneath you all at once, gray-green and enormous, the kind of view that makes a grown man go quiet without meaning to. The tower itself sits above timberline on a shoulder of rock the maps call Corbin Ridge, though nobody at district could tell me who Corbin was. 1 room on stilts, windows on all 4 walls, a catwalk you are told never to lean on and every single lookout leans on anyway, myself included, usually with a cup of coffee in one hand and the whole drainage falling away underneath the other. Glass insulators sit under each of the 4 legs, same as they do on every tower in the district. So a strike to the roof has somewhere to go besides through the man standing on the floor. And I noticed them my first afternoon the way you notice anything that exists purely, because enough men before you did not survive not having it. Peg helped me carry the last of the supplies up the stairs, 41 of them, wood gone silver with weather, and she counted them out loud as we climbed, a habit of hers that she never explained, and that I picked up without meaning to, the way you pick up a hymn from sitting in the same pew every Sunday. Dale had left in enough of a hurry that his footlocker was still half-packed when I got there. A chambray work shirt, sleeves rolled the way a man rolls them when he is not planning to be somewhere fancy. A paperback western with the cover torn off, spine cracked at around page 60, as if he had read that far exactly once and never again. A grocery receipt from a town 200 miles east used as a bookmark at that same page, like he had meant to come back to it, and simply never did. A harmonica, 2 reeds gone flat, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $6 because it was sitting by the register. I tried it one evening in July, more out of boredom than curiosity, and got maybe 4 notes out of it before I put it back exactly where I had found it, embarrassed in front of nobody, the way you get embarrassed doing anything alone on a mountain long enough. District never sent anybody up for any of it, not the shirt, not the harmonica, not the boots still sitting by the door with the laces tucked in the way my own father used to tuck his laces. And by August, I had stopped setting the gear aside for a stranger and started simply living around it, the way you learn to live around a piece of furniture that belonged to somebody who is not coming back for it and is not quite gone either. Evenings on Corbin Ridge run long once the last light report is called in, and a man fills them however he can. I read most of what Dale had left behind eventually, including the paperback he never finished, and found it about as forgettable as a $6 Western usually is, though I noticed he had dog-eared page 40 and nothing else in the whole book, a page with nothing remarkable on it that I could find, just 2 ranch hands arguing over a fence line same as any other page in it. I cooked plain meals on the propane ring, beans and rice mostly, canned peaches when I wanted to feel like I was celebrating something, and I wrote letters I mostly never sent, to my brother, to an old foreman from the cooperative, to nobody in particular some nights, just to have a pen moving across paper that was not the logbook for once. The logbook itself sat on the table under the sighting instrument, same as every tower keeps one, canvas bound, government issue, a pencil tied to the spine with butcher's twine, so it could never wander off and get lost. I opened it my first night mostly out of the kind of boredom that makes a man read the ingredients on a can of beans twice over. Dale's handwriting filled the first half of the season in small, cramped letters, temperature, wind, visibility, the kind of entries that could have come out of any tower's log in the district, dull the way the Forest Service likes it. Then I turned past the last entry he had written and found more writing waiting for me on the pages after it. It was dated forward, 5 days ahead of where I stood that night, and it was in my hand. Not a hand like mine. Mine. The same slant on the capital W I have always had trouble squaring off, the same habit of dotting my lowercase i's a half-inch too far to the left, a tick my mother used to tease me about at the kitchen table when I was young enough to still be teased about it. 5 days of entries, weather and smoke counts, and 1 supply request for batteries, written before I had thought to write a word of it, in handwriting no stranger could have faked well enough to fool the man who owned it. I told myself somebody had played a joke on the new man. Dale, maybe, before he left in such a hurry, or one of the seasonal crew who thought a spooked lookout made for good gossip come autumn. I did not sleep well that first week regardless. I would catch myself watching my own hand while I wrote the honest entry each morning, comparing it letter for letter against the one already sitting 3 lines below it, like I was being tested on something nobody had told me I would be graded on. The days themselves settled into a shape fast, the way any real job does once you strip the romance off it. Up before the sun to read the dry bulb, and the wet bulb off the weather instruments bolted to the catwalk rail. Haul 2 buckets from the spring box, a quarter-mile down slope before the morning got hot enough to make the carry miserable. Sweep the floor of whatever moths had died against the windows overnight. And then hours at the sighting table turning slow circles with the sighting arm, checking every quadrant of the drainage against nothing more exciting, most days, than haze and a red-tailed hawk working the thermals off the east face. A man does not picture a fire lookout's life as mostly housekeeping and patience until he is living it, and by the second week, I had stopped picturing it any other way. Corbin Ridge shares a radio channel with 2 other lookouts that season. A young woman named Iris posted on a peak the district called Paiute Saddle, 40-some miles east, and an older man everybody just called Wit who worked a tower down toward the Deschutes side that dropped off the air whenever weather rolled through. Mornings we traded reports on Channel 5, temperature and wind and whatever smoke we had, and most evenings, once the official business was done, Iris and I would talk another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Her sister's upcoming wedding, a novel she was working her way through, whether the huckleberry crop looked thin compared to last year, the kind of talk 2 lonesome people fall into when the alternative is silence, and a logbook that already knows what you are going to write in it. The first entry came true on a Tuesday in the middle of July, during what the district called a dry lightning bust. 40-some strikes across the drainage overnight with not a drop of rain behind any of them. I sat through most of it on the stool with the glass insulator legs, counting the gap between flash and thunder out of old habit, the way my father taught me to do as a boy on the porch back home. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and somewhere around strike 30, I stopped counting because the gap had gotten too short to bother. Channel 5 stayed busy half the night, Wit calling in strikes off his own ridge, dispatch acknowledging each one calm as anything, the whole district awake and watching together in the dark. The forward page had said clear skies by morning, wind out of the southwest at 10, 1 smoke column bearing 210 degrees, distance approximately 6 miles. I woke that Tuesday to exactly that sky. Spent the whole morning working the sighting table across every quadrant the way training tells you to after a bust like that, lining the sighting arm up on the map ring, and reading the bearing off the print scale the same way every lookout in that district has done it for the better part of a century. By early afternoon, I had a real column of smoke rising off a ridge to the southwest, right where the book had told me 5 days before that smoke existed to look for it. I called it in on Channel 5 and gave the bearing, and dispatch read the coordinates back to me within 2 degrees of what the page already held. A man alone on a mountain can talk himself out of almost anything if he is patient enough, and I was patient. Lucky guesses, I told myself. A pattern in the weather any lookout with 3 seasons under his belt might read 5 days out if he had the drainage memorized the way Dale plainly did. I did not let myself think too hard, that week, about how a man predicts one specific stranger's fire before the lightning that starts it has even crossed the ridge. It was the 9th of July that I found Dale's note, tucked into the back cover where the government binding had come loose at the glue. Not an entry, a note, addressed to whoever came after him, written smaller than his log hand, like he had been in a hurry or ashamed or both at once. Scattered through his earlier entries too, I noticed once I went back looking, were tiny marginal marks I had taken for nothing, a single question mark beside a weather line, the word again underlined once beside a smoke bearing that apparently was not the first time it had shown up in that exact spot. Small evidence a careful man leaves behind when he is still deciding whether to believe his own eyes. The note itself told me plainly what he had learned the hard way. Whatever the book writes ahead of the day, you honor it or you correct it. If what actually happens differs from what the page already says, you sit down before midnight and write the truth of it underneath, in your own hand, no matter how small the difference. He underlined the word underneath twice. He did not explain what happened to a man who failed to, only that he had failed to once in his second season, and that the following morning the page for that missed day had come up entirely blank, no forward entries at all for a stretch after it, and that dispatch had no record of a radio call he remembered making as clearly as anything, and that the batteries he had requested that week never arrived, because so far as anyone at District was concerned, he had never asked for them. The last line stayed with me longest, where he had written that the book was not lying to him. It was only keeping better track of him than he had ever learned to keep of himself. I started correcting after that, small things at first, treating the page the way you would treat a subordinate's report that needed a quiet fix rather than a public argument. The book might say visibility ran 10 miles when the true visibility, on account of a low haze rolling up the Sawtooth Fork drainage, was closer to 7, and I would write beneath it, in fact, haze reduced visibility to 7 miles by mid-morning. Another week, the forward page told me plainly, bear cub near woodpile, 6:30 in the evening, and I read that line every morning for 5 days running, half amused, half unable to stop myself checking the woodpile every evening around that hour the way you check a mailbox you already know is empty. On the 5th evening, I was splitting kindling when something moved at the tree line, and it was not a cub at all, a full-grown black bear, easily 300 pounds, close enough that I could hear it breathing before I saw the shape of it clearly, and I stood there with the hatchet loose in my hand doing the math on how fast I could reach the stairs, 41 of them, before deciding the animal wanted nothing from me and moving off north into the timber on its own unhurried schedule. I corrected the page that night, careful and plain, no bear cub, adult black bear, moved off north within the hour, and left out of the written record entirely how long I had stood frozen with a hatchet in my hand over an animal the book had told me, 5 days early, not to worry about. The book never argued with a correction. It simply accepted it and moved forward, 5 days ahead of me again by the next sunrise, patient as anything with all the time in the world. By the end of July, I had stopped questioning why and started only managing how. I kept the forward pages folded so I would not read further ahead than the day required. A discipline Dale's note had recommended, and I obeyed without needing to be told twice. I counted my 41 stairs every morning going down for water and every evening coming back up from the catwalk, the way Peg had taught me without meaning to teach me anything. And somewhere in there, the counting stopped being about the stairs at all and started being about having one plain fact in a day that I was certain nobody had written down for me first. There was a coffee ring on the 11th page of the book, brown and old, the shape of a mug I never once found anywhere in that tower, not in the cupboard, not in Dale's footlocker, not in any box Peg hauled up on any resupply. I asked her about it on her next run while we unloaded canned goods onto the shelf together, whether Dale drank from something that had not come up the mountain with the rest of his gear. She stopped what she was doing and looked at the page a good deal longer than the question called for, long enough that I noticed the mule outside had gone quiet too, and then she said, "Not that I ever saw," and asked whether I wanted the propane topped off before the weather turned, in a voice that made clear the coffee mug was a subject we were finished discussing. It was the only time all season Peg cut a conversation short on purpose, and I never raised the book with her again after that, though I noticed she stopped counting the stairs out loud on her last 2 visits and started climbing them in silence instead. August brought the second thing I could not talk myself past. Iris, on Paiute Saddle, mentioned one evening over the radio, easy as anything, that she was thinking of hiking down 2 days early to catch her sister's wedding, said it the way you say something you have not fully decided on yet. The forward page in my book that week already had it written, in my hand, told Iris on the radio she should go, covered her shift reports myself while she was off the mountain. I had not told her any such thing, not yet, and for 2 days I made a point of saying nothing about weddings or early hikes at all. Testing, The way you test a loose tooth with your tongue instead of just pulling it. On the third evening, she brought it up again, sounding more certain this time, and something in me, watching that folded page I was not supposed to read ahead of, said, "Go on, I have got your shift," and meant it before I had decided to mean it. I covered her reports for 4 mornings running and never once wrote down that I had a choice in the matter. Iris came back on the air the following Monday, full of wedding stories, her sister's dress, a groomsman who fell off a dock into a lake fully dressed, the ordinary happy chaos of a family gathered in one place for a reason worth celebrating. She thanked me twice for covering her shift and said she hoped she had not put me out any, and I told her it was no trouble at all, which was true, and did not mention that I had known she was going before she had fully decided it herself, because I could not think of a way to say that out loud that did not sound like the kind of thing a man says right before somebody stops wanting to talk to him over the radio in the evenings. I sat with the sighting table cold in front of me a long while that night, turning over how easily I had said, "Go on, I have got your shift," like it was my own idea instead of a line already sitting in a book downstairs. And I understood then, in a way I had managed to avoid understanding through the bear and the smoke column both, that the book was no longer only describing my mornings back to me. It had started reaching past the edges of my own days into other people's, and I had let it, because the version of me it wrote was, by every measure I had, a decent man doing a decent thing for a friend. Late in August, during a slow evening with nothing but static and weather between us, I asked Whit over the radio, careful to keep my voice as idle as I could manage, whether he had ever known a lookout up on Corbin Ridge before Dale Ashby. There was a pause on his end longer than the question should have earned, long enough that I thought the mountains had finally swallowed the signal between us the way they sometimes did. Then he said that he had known too, a long time back, and that both of them had finished out full seasons and gone home fine, and that the one thing they had in common with each other, so far as he ever noticed, was that neither one talked much about the book after they came down, and neither one ever asked to go back up. He did not offer anything past that, and I did not ask him to, because some part of me understood I already had every answer I actually needed, only not in words I wanted spoken plainly over a shared channel where dispatch might be listening. We talked about the huckleberry crop after that, and did not raise Corbin Ridge again for the rest of the season. September came the way Septembers do at that elevation, mornings sharp enough to see your breath, huckleberry going red along the switchbacks, the fire danger easing off with the season's first real rain in 6 weeks. I had let myself settle into the rhythm of it by then. 41 stairs, folded pages, corrections written plain and without argument, the way a man settles into any job once its shape has stopped surprising him. Then came the entry for the 20th, written 5 days ahead like all the rest, and it did not mention weather at all. It said, "Wrote to Carol, told her I was not coming down in September." I had not written to Carol, had not spoken to her since April, had told myself and the district ranger both that this season was meant to clear my head of exactly that subject, not open a fresh correspondence with it. Nobody at district knew her name. Peg did not know her name. I had never once said it over the radio where Iris or Whit might have caught it and repeated it back as a joke. There was no way for a prank to reach that specific, that private, unless the hand writing it was not borrowing mine at all. It was mine, working 5 days ahead of the rest of me, for reasons I did not have yet and was not sure I wanted to go looking for. I thought a good deal that week about a particular Sunday, 3 years back, when Carol and I had spent the whole afternoon arguing about a kitchen faucet that had been dripping since spring. Not about the faucet really, never about the faucet, but the faucet was the thing we could stand to argue about out loud. I remember the drip had a rhythm to it, 2 quick and 1 slow, and I had counted it lying awake more nights than I ever admitted to her, the same way I would come to count 41 stairs on a mountain 3 years later, like counting something small and fixable, was easier than naming the thing that actually needed fixing. I bought a washer for it at the hardware store and never once installed it, and the washer sat in a kitchen drawer through the rest of our marriage, and I could not tell you, even now, whether Carol ever found it there or simply stopped opening that drawer. I have never once, in all the months since we separated, managed to have that argument honestly, the real one underneath the fixture, and it occurred to me sitting with that page that the book seemed to know exactly which honest thing I had been avoiding saying, better than I knew it myself some mornings. I did not write to Carol that week. I want that on the page as plainly as I can put it down. I left the entry uncorrected 2 full days, which Dale's note had warned me never to do, telling myself that leaving it wrong might be its own kind of correction, might teach the book something about me for once instead of the other way around. On the 3rd day, I woke to find the page for that day gone blank exactly as Dale had described it. No forward entries past it. Nothing but government issue lines waiting on a hand that, for the first time all summer, did not already know what it wanted to say. I called in my morning report on Channel 5 out of plain habit, gave wind and visibility same as any day. Dispatch came back asking me to repeat myself, said they had no log of a Corbin Ridge call in the last 2 mornings, asked whether my radio was functioning properly. It was. I checked the battery contacts twice with my own hands to be sure. I wrote to Carol that same afternoon, a short letter, nothing about the tower or the book in it, nothing she would have believed if I had put it in, only that I was sorry, and that I did not think I would be ready to talk the way we had planned once the season ended. I sent it out with the next resupply and did not tell Peg what the envelope held. The following morning the forward pages had come back, 5 days ahead again, same as always, and the first line of them read, in my own hand, "Mail went out fine." I do not have a tidy explanation for what that book is, and I have mostly stopped looking for one, the way Dale must have stopped looking somewhere in his 2nd season, before he found a different kind of quiet behind a diner grill 2 states from here. I have come to think it keeps better track of a man than he keeps of himself, and that a man can get used to almost anything that keeps that kind of track, if the alternative is going back down the mountain to a life he was never fully sure he wanted to keep living in the first place. I spent the last week of September doing the small closing chores every lookout does toward the end of a season, inventorying what supplies remained for whoever came next, oiling the hinges on the shutters, patching a split in the stovepipe with wire Peg had left me for exactly that purpose. I found myself doing each task slower than it required, the way you slow down walking toward a door you are not fully sure you want to walk through, and I noticed, without much surprise left in me by then, that I had started counting the days remaining the same unhurried way I counted the 41 stairs, a number I trusted precisely because it was mine to count and nobody else's. My relief was due on the 28th, a young man off the District Trail crew whose name I never got the chance to learn properly before any of this settled itself one way or the other. 5 days before he was due, on the 23rd, I opened to the forward pages the way I did every morning and found an entry for that date, plain as any weather report. Relief arrived 0900, told him I was staying through October. Radio district, they said fine. Extensions granted this time of year when a man requests one, and the fire danger allows for it. I sat with that entry a long while before I corrected a word of it. Dale's note had never covered a case quite like this one, a day that had not gone wrong so much as gone somewhere I had not yet decided to send it myself. I ran the citing table through its rounds twice that afternoon out of nothing but nervous habit, hands wanting a task, while the rest of me sat with a page I could not stop reading. I found myself, more than once that week, picturing the actual radio exchange the entry only summarized, Dispatch's voice on Channel 5 asking me to confirm I was requesting a season extension, my own voice answering back some version of a sentence I had not spoken yet, and could nonetheless hear clearly. the particular flat tone I use when I have already made up my mind about something and am only informing people of the fact. It unsettled me worse than the weather predictions ever had, hearing a conversation in my head that had not happened, delivered in my own voice, word for word, like a man overhearing himself through a wall. I thought about the 4 lines Carol had written back, come up with the last resupply, no promises in them, only that she was glad I had finally written, and that she would wait and see what October brought before either of us decided anything further. I read those 4 lines more times that week than I am willing to admit to anybody, folded into my shirt pocket during the day and under my pillow at night, like a boy half my age would have done. And each time I read them, I found myself wondering whether Carol herself had any advance notice of what she was going to write to me, the way I seemed to have advance notice of what I was going to write to her, or whether that particular kind of mercy only extended as far as this one drainage and stopped cold at the district line. I thought too about the diner outside Yakima and a man behind the grill who would not discuss a mountain he had already left behind him, and whether the leaving had done him any real good at all, or whether he had only traded one kind of unrecorded life for another that looked, from a distance, a little more like living. I wondered if Dale ever stood at that grill on a slow evening and caught himself missing the 41 stairs, the folded pages, the particular comfort of a book that always knew what came next even when the knowing cost him something he could not quite name to strangers who asked. I have not corrected the entry for the 28th. It sits 5 days off yet as I write this tonight, and I could still walk down those 41 stairs one final time and prove the book wrong, the way I never quite managed to prove it wrong across the whole rest of the summer. The wind has come up out of the north in the last hour, the first real cold front of the fall, rattling the loose shutter I never did finish patching, and somewhere below the timberline I can hear what might be elk moving through the huckleberry in the dark, unbothered by any of this, going on with a life that owes nothing to any book anybody ever wrote about it. I am not certain tonight which outcome I am actually hoping for. I think a part of me has been hoping for it since April, since the drip in that faucet, since long before I ever heard the name Corbin Ridge or opened a canvas-bound book that already knew me better than I had bothered to know myself. I only know that whichever one it turns out to be, the book will have gotten there first, and it will be my own hand that writes it true, the same hand that dotted its I's wrong at my mother's kitchen table 30-some years before any of this patient, it turns out, as anything. The last page in the book is dated the 29th, 1 line only, the ink pressed hard enough to nearly tear through to the page beneath it. Told him to radio down that I was. That is as far as the ink goes. District logged Warren Kessler off duty on the 4th of October, 5 days later than his own paperwork called for, no explanation offered, and none asked for twice. The trail crew never filed a name for whoever hiked up to relieve him that year, and Corbin Ridge sat unstaffed the following season, first time in 11 years district had not put a man on it. I do not know what became of him past that page. I have got a shelf of things I do not have endings for, and this one sits on it now beside the rest. What I keep coming back to is that coffee ring on page 11, and the one detail district ever offered me about the mug that made it, which is that when they finally cleared the tower for good, there was a mug sitting in the cupboard that nobody on the crew remembered packing in. I am closing this one the way I found it, loose pages back in order as best as I can manage, spine wrapped so the damp does not get in any further than it already has. This is the Stark Diaries. If you have got a rule of your own that you have never told anybody the reason for, I would think about writing that reason down somewhere before another hand gets to it first. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. Tell me in the comments what you would have written on that 28th page.